what is evaluation? We all have this idea that evaluation is about evaluating people. We tend to think in evaluation in terms of evaluation of our job performance by a superior or a supervisor. However, evaluation can be used for many other purposes and involve more than just evaluation of people. Evaluation is defined by Fitzpatrick, Worthen, and Saunders 2011 in Program Evaluation, Alternative Approaches, and Practical Guidelines. They define evaluation as judging the quality of something to establish the value, the merit, or worth of a product or program or policy. The evaluation approach this Pecha Kucha deals with is the consumer-oriented approach. The purpose of this approach is to inform, educate, and help consumers choose between varying programs or products. The major theorists of this approach were or are Michael Scriven, who was a major contributor, Jean B. Glass, and Ralph Nader. This approach utilizes a checklist covering criteria such as performance in relation to cost effectiveness. It emphasizes criteria and standards to which products and programs are evaluated and judged, according to Hogan 2010. Other approaches have a variety of audiences. However, the consumer-oriented approach is best characterized as having a singular audience. The audience, in this case, being one that is the purchasing public or interested public. The uniqueness is further exacerbated in that the evaluator does not know his or her audience. The consumer-oriented approach differs from other approaches in that the evaluator is usually someone with experience in judging things instead of being someone very familiar with one thing or a connoisseur of one thing being judged. They are, in a sense, a jack-of-all-trades evaluator. Best examples of consumer-oriented evaluations would be the magazine Consumer Reports, Maclean's annual ranking of universities, the Fraser Institute's rankings of schools in British Columbia, and Car and Driver magazine. The main theorists of the consumer-oriented approaches include, as alluded to earlier, Michael Scriven. He is most concerned with the ability of the evaluator to evaluate a thing or a program, in particular the key components of a product. He wants to know how good the thing is, or how good the product is. The approach is one relatively easy to use and easily implemented. It is of particular interest because it can remove bias and objectively analyze the effectiveness of programs and processes, as often seen, as alluded to earlier, in the magazine Consumer Reports, where they evaluate just a single product, such as a computer. First, it is imperative to establish the judging criteria. The criteria should be ones valued or emphasized by the consumer. In other words, things the consumer will appreciate about the product, or things that the consumer looks for in the product. This is what Scriven calls a, quote, functional analysis, or in other words, figuring out what is important about the product in relation to its quality. Again, Scriven was concerned with developing transparent checklists for use as judging criteria, such as the one he developed for judging educational products that is still in use today. His checklist is long and lengthy, but it is useful for evaluators. It can be used to evaluate products in different stages of production, and in this sense, it makes the evaluation process reflective. It becomes a means to evaluate a product, both in a formative sense, meaning a chance to revise the product, and a summative sense, meaning decisions were based on purchases by the consumers. Because the consumer-oriented approach can be both summative and formative in nature, just the act of evaluation itself can be educational in that it creates a learning culture and a culture that is reflective. In this sense, evaluation is always a work in progress. Evaluations can take place throughout the life cycle of a product and can also be reviewed using this approach because of its ease of use, the simplicity, and the checklist designed by theorists such as Scrivens, Glasser, and Nader. The most popular users of this approach have been government and various agencies. The best known example would be the WWC, or the What Works Clearinghouse. It represents the largest collection of evaluated educational products that have been reviewed in the United States. The What Works Clearinghouse, however, differs from Scriven's original intent in that it focuses on program outcomes. Scriven, meanwhile, favored a much more comprehensive approach that looked at needs and even unintended outcomes, not just the end product. The approach, at times, overlaps with other approaches, including the expertise-oriented approach. The best example of this is the test reviews of the Burroughs Institute of Mental Measurements. The reviews are conducted by experts, but using a criterion approach favored by Scrivens. To review, the consumer-oriented approach is focused on judging the quality of a given product according to a criterion. It is done by an evaluator that does not know his or her audience, unlike the other approaches outlined in the text. Contributors to this approach, as mentioned earlier, include Scrivens, Jean B. Glass, and Ralph Nader. The consumer-oriented approach is being widely used today by popular media and professional evaluators to judge programs and everyday products. The best example that exists today of the consumer-oriented approach would be the magazine Consumer Reports. It is about the ability of the evaluator to judge many things, but it is not necessary that the evaluator be a connoisseur of any one product or program. The approach is most importantly, especially in the area of the consumer being able to judge a product in comparison to alternatives. The approach has influenced other areas of evaluation, if not in many areas, at least in the area of making evaluators understand what their main role is, which is to make a judgment about a program or product.